Hello and welcome to Scotty Kilmer Live Car Talk Podcast, where I use my 51 years of fixing cars to help you all around the world with your car problems. Questions too big or too small. You see, there's no ads anywhere, no banners. I'm just telling you the truth from my experience so you don't get ripped off with car repair or buying the wrong car. Remember, during the show, ask your questions on the live chat. I pick the best ones and answer them. First question is some guy, and he says, Scotty, what do you think about Suzuki as a brand and older Suzuki cars like a 96 Bolero or Steam? Are they reliable cars? I'm considering buying a really cheap one and can't decide. Okay, here's the thing. They make great motorcycles. They always had. Their cars, they're kind of cheaply made. They pulled out of the United States decades ago. And the rest of the world, though, some people like them. I was on the British Virgin Islands. All the rental little Jeeps were Suzukis. And they last quite some time. They can be decent vehicles. Now, if you live somewhere else in the world, I know in Canada that they still sell them and some people are happy with them. If you can get them cheap and there's still parts available there, go right ahead, I know in Australia they sell a lot of them. If you can get parts and people can fix them, you can get one cheap enough. Hey, especially if it's a standard transmission. Their automatics are kind of crappy. But if it's a standard transmission, it might last a while. If you can get it cheap, what the heck? At 96, you're talking what, a 23-year-old vehicle? So if it runs okay, why not if you get it for a few $100? But if you live in the United States, you can't get parts for the thing. So I think twice about that. Next question. Bill Camp says, I got a 2003 Honda Accord Coupe with an automatic transmission starting to go bad. I'd like to swap it out for a manual transmission. How hard would it be and is it worth the trouble? Well, let me just start out to say it's really not worth the trouble. To change an automatic to a standard, you got to change the computer system. You'd have to cut holes, put in a hole for the gear shift. You would have to hook up a clutch pedal somewhere and bolt that on. And the hydraulics is a giant pain in the butt. I've had customers do that, and they all, after they did it, said, gee, Scotty, I'll never do another thing like that again. It was just too much of a headache. All that stuff that you got to change out. And, of course, the transmission is different. So the drive shafts are different, too. You got to swap them out. It is a pain in the butt. If you really want one, go get a standard transmission and get rid of yours, because it is a gigantic pain in the rear end, swapping all that stuff out to make it work correctly. Believe me, I'd had people do it, and they all, to a man, said they'd never do it again. Next question is Chase 91. Scotty, I got a 2014 Mazda CX-5. I changed my oil around 10,000 miles. Do you recommend I should change it more with the Sky Active technology? I would. If you had full synthetic oil, I change it every 7,000 miles. With normal oil, I change it every 5,000 miles. Those engines, as they age, have problems with the Sky Active technology, with all that crazy variable valve timing thing, and a lot of it is motorcraft design that have problems anyways. Oil is cheap. Engine work is super expensive. Like I say, I change it every 5,000 miles with conventional and 7,000 with full synthetic oil. I wouldn't buy the vehicle in the first place, but you have it. So definitely you want to take good care of it because it's expensive stuff to repair. Next question is Tyler Barker, and he says, Scotty, I got a 95 Mazda MX-5 Miata. I replaced the slave and a clutch master, but it still won't go into gear. If I try to start the car and first it jumps forward and cuts off, help. Okay, first of all, make sure you get all the air out of the system. Bleed all the air out. But that said, if you sit in it overnight, get up in the morning, you step on that clutch, and it's rock hard the whole time, you don't have any air left. And if it still jumps out, then you got a problem in the transmission. Because the clutch and the master, if they're nice and tight and they push down and it still has a problem getting into gear, you got a transmission problem with it. And those are notorious as they age for having some problems in their transmissions wearing out internally. Next question is, on a good day, 627. I guess on a good day, 626 was taken. Scotty, I recently bought a 2008 Toyota Matrix. When it warmed up, it vibrates at idle, especially the stoplight. Sometimes it's so strong the car starts shaking. Any thoughts? Okay, first thing you want to do is watch my video. Make your car run better with a little spray cleaner. You buy 2 cans of the spray cleaner, costs you maybe 14 bucks total, and follow all that clean, and a lot of times it'll fix it all. You get carbon buildup on a throttle, or the MAF sensor gets a little dirty. Try that. That's often the case. Now, if you do that and it still shakes a little bit at idle, it's not going to hurt anything. A lot of people will just put it in neutral and it stops shaking. Live with it that way. Because it can be a sign that the torque converter, the automatic transmission's straining a little, and it doesn't really hurt anything. In my 94 Celica, I shift it into neutral all the time, and it idles like a clock. But if I put it in drive, it shakes some, and that's because the torque converter and the tranny's a little bit worn with 240,000 miles, but it still runs fine. And I've driven it years that way. Next question. Turbo says, should I buy a 2008 Honda CRV with 70,000 miles for $5K, or a 2005 Volkswagen with 160,000 miles, or $3,000 for my first car? Oh, definitely get the Honda. Those are great vehicles. If it's only got 70,000 miles. Volkswagens are endless money pits to begin with. And with 160,000 miles and being 14 years old, I wouldn't waste $3,000. I wouldn't waste $300 on that car. The CRVs are excellent vehicles. I would definitely go with the CRV, especially with that low mileage on it. $5,000 for that is a steal. Next question. Robert Phillips says, Scotty, what do you think of Bars Leak? It's a good product. When I get a customer and say they don't have much money to spend, and I say, okay, you got a leak in the radiator, or you got a leak in the head gasket, and the radiator isn't that bad, it might cost $400 or $500 drive out. But if it's a head gasket starting to leak, it's going to cost at least $1,500. And I often use the Bars metallic seal up, and sometimes it can stop the leak for years. It doesn't hurt anything, it doesn't clog anything up. The only thing you have to realize is if you have a leak in the cooling system, look at the coolant. Get a turkey baster when it's cold, suck out some of it, squirt it into a glass, and look at it. If it's all dirty and corroded, first thing you got to do is flush it all out. Get it clean, then try some sealer, because you do not want to use a sealer in any vehicle that has clogged up, dirty coolant, because then it can clog up everything. You want to always use a sealer with clean coolant, or if it's summertime, pure water. You can put it in for a week and see what happens. It won't hurt anything running it for 1 week. But if you are going to run it with coolant, you want to make sure the coolant is clean, 50% coolant, 50% water, then put a little of the sealer in. But I've seen that Bar sealer seal up leaks pretty good. It's been out there since I was a kid. Even my grandfather's day, that company was around. Next question. Good Mafia say, hi, Scotty, I'm thinking about buying a first-generation Chevy Silverado Sierra extended cab. Are they reliable and dependable? How many miles are reasonable in a price range? Thank you. Okay. Well, the first generation Silverados were pretty well-made vehicles. The only thing is, they're pretty old. That was a long time ago. If you're buying something that old, there's all kinds of problems they could have. And if I personally wouldn't buy any vehicle like that if you're paying any amount of money that's got more than maybe 150,000 miles on it, because then you're going to have to worry about transmissions going out, engines, and all that stuff. But then again, it depends on what you're paying. If you're buying one, they were pretty well built, and say you got to put 1,800 into a rebuilt transmission, well, heck, go ahead. The engine's in good shape. I mean, go ahead. Those are vehicles that you can keep fixing and fixing and fixing. They're nothing like the later model GM cars and trucks that have problems up the wazoo. The old ones were pretty reliable. So, I mean, if you want to find one that's in decent shape and maybe put some money into it, go right ahead, or find one that somebody took really good care of it. I wouldn't buy a new one, but those old ones, the first generation ones, are pretty well made. Next question is Mars. Scotty, awesome videos. I have an '02 Ford Ranger, keeps blowing fuses. Just replaced the blower motor, and I went to the panel switches. What the heck's going on here? Okay, fuses blow because you're getting too much power running through the system, which you either have a dead short, something like a motor that's pulling too many amps, a bad blower motor resistor that pulls too many watts, or a wiring problem somewhere that's straining either power or ground. Electrical work is never any fun because you never know what's doing it. There's so many things in an electrical series that can go wrong, and you have to test them all. So you got to go through the wiring harness. You got to go through the ground to see if there's a ground fault problem. But since you said you changed the blower motor, the switches, well, try the blower motor resistor. A lot of times that assembly goes bad on GM. And especially pay attention to where the wiring plugs into the blower motor resistor, because on GMs, they were made like crap. And a lot of times, all those little pins short out, and you'll see some of the wires are melted. Then you'd have to cut them all off and rewire them with a new splice kit. They make the splice kits because they break all the time on GMs. But you check that first, because that's a known fault on those things. Next question. Night Rider says, what's the best type of car to teach your kids on how to drive? A good beater car, like the video I just made, why it's a good idea to buy a beater car. You want something that's safe, of course. But if you're in the car teaching them how to drive, generally it's going to be an automatic transmission. So I would say you get an older Toyota Camry, they can take a lot of abuse and still keep going down the line, but they're still safe because even the older ones still had airbags in them. That's a pretty good one. Or like if somebody's got a Ford old LTD or, any of the Grand Marquis, any of those big old cars that are safe inside, teach them to drive in that because they are safe. Size does have something to do with safety. There's no arguing that. Let's face it, you're safer in a Camry than you are in a Corolla, and you're safer in an LTD than you are in like a Ford Escort. Size does matter when it comes to getting in a wreck. Next question. Aldo says, my speedometer starts to work, but then it stops. Okay, if it comes and it goes, generally it's a problem in the electronics. When I was younger, all cars were simple. All they had was a speedometer cable that went from the transmission to the speedometer head in the dash, and the cable would break or the dash unit was breaking. It was really easy to check. You just have to pull the cable out of the dash, drive around, put your finger on it. If it still spins, the cable's okay, and then it's the dash unit. But today, they're all electronic, and they've been that way in most cars since maybe '94, so it's been a long time. There's speed sensors on them. A lot of times the speed sensors start to go bad, and then you just replace them. Usually they don't cost 40, 50 bucks. They just bolt in and out. But if it's not that, then it's generally the head unit in your dash, and those are pretty expensive. If that's the case, a lot of guys will just go to a junkyard and buy the whole dash, used one. If it's an older car for maybe 50, 60 bucks, put the whole thing, plug it in, and away you go. Sensor's the easiest thing to try out first of all. Next question. Running Code 3 says, Scotty, what's the story on those famous glasses? Where'd you get them? How long have you had them? 20-something years. That's an Italian design. Of course, now they're made in China. Everything goes designed in Italy, but made in China. But, I started wearing them when doing welding and stuff because you don't want all this flare coming in your eyes, and I even put goggles over them too, so it's not like it's just naked. If you're working on cars, it's a good idea to wear glasses. I'm blind as a bat. If I take them off, right now I'm looking at the screen that's a foot and a half away and it's all blurry. I can't see anything. I'm as nearsighted as can be. I can see things that are 4 inches away and not any further, so... And I got light shining in my face now from the studio, so hey, I wear them all the time. Plus, I'm getting old. If I take them off, I look too old. Next question. Aaron Chase says, I got a 98 Bravado. All-wheel drive doesn't work. Worked 2 months ago. No codes being thrown. Help. Okay. Realize, even though it's a 98 and it's relatively old, it still has all kinds of computer controls on it. So there's not really much you can do yourself other than jack it up in there, look under, and make sure all the wires are plugged into it. But if they are and all the vacuum hoses are hooked up, you go to a guy like me. We get our fancy dealer level scan tool. We hook it up and we start doing bidirectional controls. I just worked on one a couple weeks ago. And I'd get in and I'd say, okay, activate the solenoid, and then it would show it's trying to activate it, and it would show if the solenoid was activated and turned itself on or off. And I can do a lot of testing without having to take everything apart and getting out a digital ohm meter and start doing resistance checks. It's very, very complex. You really want to find an honest guy like me to check it out first. Other than if you're going to look at stuff yourself, like I say, crawl under there, look at all the electronic stuff, make sure nothing's come unplugged, make sure that any vacuum lines are hooked up and haven't rotten and fallen off, because it's a 22-year-old vehicle, and a lot of stuff could be rotted off on it now. So, I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff that can go wrong when they get old, and you really have to get them scanned if you don't see any obvious things. It's all electronic these days. Next question. Daniel Ayala says, Scotty, got the 93 Nissan pickup on your recommendations. Great so far. What are the issues, quirks in the truck? Should I worry about the future? I love your videos. Well, it's a really old vehicle. What, 26 years old? But they were well made back in 93. If it's a standard transmission, it could run forever. Now, the automatic transmissions are the weakest things of those trucks. But if it works fine now and it isn't automatic, it can still last quite some time as long as you baby it and don't go peeling out all the time and try to ram the accelerator as fast as you can when you're accelerating. If you baby them, they can last quite some time. I got customers with them that have 250,000 miles. They're still going down the road in them. You'll never see that in a late model Nissan. They just don't hold up since Renault merged with them. But just keep taking care of it. Don't overheat the engine. Change the oil regularly. Change the coolant once every 3-4 years. Just take care of it, and you never know how long it's going to last. Next question. Rob Fern says, is there any way to check the batteries in each TPMS module without going to the dealership? Okay. For those of you who don't know, all your modern cars have tire pressure monitoring systems, and most of the modern ones, each tire inside the valve stem is a sending unit that sends the pressure to the receiving unit in your car. And as nutty as it sounds, each one is battery driven. They have their own power supply, which is a battery. Of course, eventually the batteries wear out. It's only common, right? If they do go bad, it will trip a code on your car. And then when you read the code, it'll say sensor number 1, 2, 3, or 4. And with a good scan tool, you can even drive down the road and you'll see there's no signal coming from the right rear tire, and you'll know that that's the one that's bad. To actually test them without a code, let's say you think it's not working right, but there aren't any codes, there are machines, and I have them, but I mean, even the cheap ones are about $350, $400, and you go to each one and you can test them. I doubt that you're ever going to want to buy something like that, but any independent mechanic who's good will have that equipment to go walk by and taste them. I have, and it takes like 5 minutes to check the whole car. But I mean, I wouldn't even worry. If you're not tripping a code on your car, it should be working, because when those systems go bad, they always trip that tire sensor code. They're very reliable when it comes to that. Next question. Jordan Davenport says, Scotty, my '01 Corolla shifter cable seems to be broken. I can only find parts at the dealer for $250. Any way to get the aftermarket? I've called a few junkyards, no luck. Okay, what you want to do is start out with a place like Rock Auto Online and go to Hemmings Auto News. and look and see if anybody at either of those has them. If they don't, odds are you're going to be stuck with a dealership for that part because it's such an oddball part. But you could also check any really good junkyard that's got a Watts line, 1-800 Watts line, and usually somebody somewhere in the country has them. The only thing is it's such a hassle to take that cable out of that car. Most of the time when they tear them apart, they just cut the old cable and pull the engine and transmission out and don't think, because it's a real job taking it apart and putting it in. It is not a fun job to replace those cables when they go out. It's an awful lot of work. Next question. NASCAR fan 1795 says, Scotty, what are good trucks for a work truck? I'm looking for a good truck under $5,000. Thanks. Well, good luck on that because everybody wants a good work truck for under $5,000. Now, for a regular sized truck, medium or small truck, you can't beat the Toyotas. They run forever. They're just very hard to find and they have very high resale value because of that. Everybody knows they're great trucks. But if you can find a Ranger, the Rangers can be good trucks too. If you're talking about a full-size pickup truck, though, you're not going to find much of a good pickup, full-size pickup for under $5,000 unless you get lucky. Somebody gets thrown in jail, or some old guy dies or retires and he can't drive anymore, and he's going to sell an old truck that's in good shape, cheap. You might check that. Why not? You could look at the F-150s. They're really good trucks too. That if you can find one of those that's older, but it has maybe medium or lower mileage on it. Next question. Tony Richardson says, Scotty, should I buy a 2017 GT 350 or wait for the GT 500? Me, I'd wait for the GT 500. Hey, I'm still a V8 man, If you want to get a fast car, get a V8. The GT 350 is the V6, and yeah, it's fast, but I mean, as for classics and for what might be worth more over time, if that's one of the last of the great V8s, it'll keep its value. Where the 6s, they don't hold the value like the 8s do. I definitely would wait for the GT 500. If you want to spend that kind of money, why not get something that's got a little more collectability to it than the V6 that probably, I can't see them becoming collector's items. People like the 8s. They don't like the 6s. Next question. So Rambo says, Scotty, what's your opinion on a 2000 Dodge Ram 2500 Cummins 5.9 auto? My grandfather has one and he loves that thing. Okay. It's a 2000. I'm not a Dodge fan, as everybody who watches me knows, but it's a 2000. It's got a Cummins engine and it's probably got an Allison automatic transmission. And those engines and transmissions are really well made. And if it's a 2000 and it still runs and the body's held up on it, it could be a good truck, The newer ones, they've had a lot of problems with. I saw the other day that one of these Consumer Reports rated the 3500 Ram as the worst vehicle of 2018. So, but a 2000 now, that could be a decent vehicle. I've had customers with them that were happy with them, with that Allison transmission and the Cummins engine. Yeah. Next question. Daniel Heredia says, Scotty, I got a VW Jetta GLI 2.0 Turbo. Has 130,000 miles. It runs like new. I really take care of it, but when it goes over 4,000 RPM, it starts smoking. What could it be? Well, there's a lot of reasons a car can smoke. It's a Volkswagen with 130,000 miles. If you're curious about the engine, do a wet and dry compression test. You take out all the spark plugs, do the compression test with a gauge dry. Then put about half a tablespoon of oil in each one and do it wet. And if you see the pressure goes up a whole bunch more on some of them with the wet, that means the piston rings are worn. That's why it's burning up. Now, if you do that and the pressures don't change all that much, then it's probably the turbo starting to go out, which is very common on the Volkswagens because they're oil lubricated and cooled, the turbos. And as they age, the seal goes bad. And then when it's really spinning fast, it sucks some of that oil in and it'll start smoking white. So just being a gambling man myself, I guess your turbo seals are probably going. But do that test I just told you about and you can tell. Next question. Mudo Prego says, greeting from Georgia. I have a Trailblazer with an exhaust leak coming from the manifold. I've been to a couple of shops. They said estimates about $600 to replace it. Is it reasonable? Well, yeah, because it's such a pain in the butt taking it apart. And if it's an older one, you got to be real careful because those are cast iron manifolds and they're bolted to cast aluminum heads. And a lot of times the bolts start to break off. It can be a royal pain in the butt swapping those things out without destroying half of the vehicle. So if they guarantee you that, they're going to do a good job and that's what they're going to charge you, yeah, just don't take it to somebody who's thinking, a lot of stuff's going to break. I'll charge them a whole bunch more money when I start taking it apart. Make sure that there are reputable shops that people have dealt with before. Next question. Brian says, is the 2013 Chevy Sonic a good car? No. That's one of the worst cars that GM ever sold. Really cheaply made. I've had customers with them that they hated the cars, but then they saw that when they tried to sell them, when they're 4 or 5 years old, they get almost nothing for them. So they just kept driving them like as a junker car, use it for work back and forth and get a reliable Toyota for their nice car and just use that until finally, if it does transmission go out again, and then they don't want to put any more money, they're just junkless thing. They're really not very good cars at all. Do a little research online too. You'll see that I'm not the only one that feels that way. Next question. Praise the Lord. That's a good one. Should I go to school to learn to be a mechanic or just try to find a shop to teach me on a job? You're better off trying to find a job where you're learning there and you could be going to night school too, especially if the place will pay for your education, than you are just going straight to a school, because generally you get out of one of those schools, you're going to get the worst job anywhere, you're going to get the lowest paid job. You might as well start with a job and learn there, because hands-on learning is better than anything. My father used to have a guy that worked for him, and my father paid to train him, and he got ASE certified, and really, he was still the worst mechanic in the garage. He could do book learning, but he wasn't that good at fixing stuff. I mean, that's just kind of the way that it goes. I never went to any training. My grandfather never went to any training for fixing cars. If people have knacks for fixing something, generally they can just go and start fixing it. And especially today with the internet, where you can look stuff up, get all kinds of information anytime you want. If you got a knack, especially if you're into electronics with modern cars, you better getting a job and then learning on the job than you're wasting $20,000 to $40,000 of your own money, and then find out you're getting a job that's barely paying you more than minimum wage, and you got to buy your own tools. Next question. Keechichin04 says, is a Jeep Liberty 2003 a good car for $3,000? Okay, I am not a Chrysler fan, but in 2003, they made them a lot better than they make them today, 16 years later, since Fiat took over. And if it runs good and a mechanic checks it out for $3,000, it could be a decent vehicle. But you have to have a guy like me check it out before you throw your money out, because there's so many things that can go wrong with those things in the engine, the transmission, the electronics. And we real mechanics with our good dealer level scan tools can hook stuff up. 5 minutes, we can find out all kinds of stuff if there's any real serious problems with the vehicle. And if we say, yeah, don't buy it, don't buy it. Listen to what a good mechanic tells you. But it could be a decent knockaround car for that price, just because it's an older one. Next question. Talking Al Vape says, Scotty, what do you think about the Ranchero and El Camino? I always thought those are kind of cool vehicles. Those are the old, is it a pickup truck? Is it a car? Is it a station wagon? What is it? It was in between. But I thought they were kind of cool. And now they're kind of making a comeback. People collect them. People fix them up. They never were gigantic sellers, but they were kind of an interesting setup where they looked kind of like a car and they rode kind of like a station wagon. They rode better than a truck, not as good as a car, but better than a pickup truck. And like I say, if you're into fixing up old cars, still, if you price around, you might be able to get one at a decent price, fix it up, and have some fun. They're not outrageous there. They're not like going out and buying a 67 Mustang where you're going to have to pay a ton for the vehicle. So you can still get them reasonably cheap and have some fun with them. Well, that's it for this week. Remember, every day of the week, I upload 2 videos on the Scotty Kilmer channel on YouTube, so subscribe. You'll never miss another one, and hit the notification bell so you never miss when I put a new one up. And I'm here every Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, answering your questions worldwide, and Saturdays at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live. I'll catch you then if I don't see you until then.